Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to retired Army Lieutenant General Daniel Karbler, a senior advisor to the Missile Defense Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, about the Golden Dome missile shield and much more. And then we break down President Trump's upcoming meeting with President Putin of Russia, U.S.-China competition in space, and much more. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times, and I'm joined as always by my esteemed co-host, Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. Guy is coming to us from Huntsville, Alabama, the site of the Space and Missile Defense Symposium, and we'll have an exclusive interview coming up later from Huntsville with retired Army General Daniel Karbler. A lot of content on this podcast recently from Huntsville. Listeners may remember I was there a few months ago for the AUSA conference. So Guy and I will compare notes later offline about our favorite bars in and around Huntsville. But before that, Guy, first things first, as always, what's on your radar and what's happening in Huntsville?
Well, thanks, Ben. I'm glad that you've revealed to me what goes on when you go on business trips. I don't know if I can say the same for myself. I'm just kidding. But it is great to be with you for another week. As you know, I am in the sunny American city of Huntsville. That's really one of the preeminent hubs of rocket science, space defense, missile defense in the United States, just for the sheer number of defense contracting and engineering firms that are either based here or have operations here. And then there's this annual symposium where pretty much every company on the U.S. defense industrial landscape that has anything to do with rockets, missiles, satellites, and also all futuristic artificial intelligence and cyber aspects that go into all of that are here talking to each other and to the Pentagon officials who are their customers. What's amazing about this week, Ben, is how dramatically that landscape of companies, from the major primes like Lockheed Martin, right on down to the smaller and emerging companies, some of which Americans have never heard of, that landscape has just been shaken by President Trump's order that the U.S. will develop a so-called Golden Dome next generation missile defense shield. So the Threat Status team has been running around here trying to figure out which companies are going to be in the lead. And frankly, we don't know yet, because President Trump's Golden Dome czar, General Michael Gutlein, is really just now surveying that landscape of companies that are scrambling to get the big contracts that will ultimately shape what Golden Dome is. Will it mainly be space-based with satellites? Will the missile interceptors be based in space or on the ground? To what extent will those interceptors integrate artificial intelligence to operate autonomously? Listeners can read all about that in the Threat Status pages at the Washington Times website. But we'll also have a slate of video interviews, Ben, that I've done this week. Just a few minutes ago, I was on the floor with a company called Davidson Technologies that has one of the few quantum computing microchips. That chip came from another company called D-Wave, and it's at Davidson Technologies Huntsville headquarters. Been questions of whether quantum computing that's infinitely faster than the computing that has transformed humanity over the past few decades. The question is whether that computing is about to totally transform things like missile defense. And it's a big question that Davidson is at the cusp of trying to figure out right now. Remember, quantum computing is still a theoretical thing, even though these quantum chips are emerging.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Guy, because that's one thing that's kind of caught me just watching from here in Washington, observing what's going on down there. Is, we obviously were expecting Golden Dome, and to some degree it has, dominating the discussion down there. But there are these reports of essentially a gag order coming down from the Defense Department, from the Secretary's office to officials to not talk about this. You get into this with General Karbler a little bit later on in your interview, but what's what's the feeling around that aspect of the story been down there at the symposium? This don't talk about Golden Dome that seems to have been in effect.
Outright bizarre, Ben, and it's indicative of the trouble that the president's team at the Pentagon is having with narrative shaping around space-based missile defense and Golden Dome in general. But on the other hand, it's actually been interesting because of the need for secrecy over advanced missile defense at a moment when many here at this symposium in Huntsville will privately tell you that U.S. adversaries, particularly China, are watching very closely and are currently eating the United States' lunch in this futuristic domain. And they're very eager to copy and stay in front of anything that has to do with Golden Dome. So we're actually going to get into that, Ben, in a little bit here with my interview from here with retired Army Lieutenant General Dan Karbler.
Yeah, stay tuned for that interview. It's fascinating. I want to touch on a couple things here, Guy, before we get to that, though. And one of them is just briefly sort of a cautionary tale, if you will, about assumptions kind of often made in the media and more importantly in defense and foreign policy, national security circles. One of them has been that the Arctic is going to be this major geopolitical, military, strategic, great power battleground in the 21st century as sea ice melts and it becomes easier for navies to move assets through the region. And that's undoubtedly true to some degree, but I guess the question is, has it been blown out of proportion a little bit? Our colleague Mike Glenn this week wrote about this new RAND Corporation study that says there will only be modest activity in the central Arctic Ocean over the next 25 years, and most of it will likely consist of light commercial shipping and tourism. Now, RAND analysts said that, of course, the risk of military escalation exists, but they argue that, quote, the risk of resource-driven geopolitical conflict in the CAO, Central Arctic Ocean, is limited, unquote. Now, of course, they could be wrong too, and maybe we will see dozens of warships from multiple countries all jockeying for position in Arctic waters, but I just thought it was noteworthy because assumptions are made, and then those assumptions guide military strategy and investment dollars, and it's always worth taking a breath and stepping back and questioning how valid and accurate those assumptions really are at the core. So what is true, of course, is that Russia sees the Arctic as an important strategic region for its own ability to project power around the world. And speaking of Russia, President Vladimir Putin will meet with President Trump next week as part of the Trump administration's last-ditch effort to get a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. This Trump-Putin meeting has been on the horizon for a while, and now it seems to finally be happening. And it's an example of how, I think at the end of the day, when you strip everything else away, Trump really does believe that he, as a human being, a negotiator in his own right, can get things done through the sheer force of his own personality that nobody else can. Now, he's been extremely angry, of course, as we've covered extensively on this podcast with Vladimir Putin recently over what he sees as Russia's unwillingness to seriously entertain a ceasefire with Ukraine. So we'll see how he approaches the meeting, whether he takes that anger into the meeting. But what struck me, guys, that for an administration that often gets criticized for being chaotic and undisciplined and off message, they've really gone at this, at least for the past week or so, the Russia ceasefire push with a pretty coordinated and coherent approach. And I think they deserve some credit for it. Earlier this week, the State Department announced another $200 million in military sales to Ukraine, including the kind of extended range artillery that theoretically could potentially hit Russian formations. Trump's making good in his promise to send that equipment to Ukraine as a way to pressure Putin. And the administration appears deadly serious about secondary tariffs on Russia's oil industry. Trump says they'll go into effect in 21 days if there's no ceasefire. This would have, of course, significant effects on the countries that buy Russian oil, mainly China and India. And the administration's going out of its way to pressure India for what some White House officials have described as India's financing of the war in Ukraine. All of these things dovetailed this week over the course of about 72 hours. Economic pressure, military sales to Ukraine, and aggressive diplomatic moves by Trump. So, Guy, what do you make of this, specifically the U.S. India piece of this equation? Do you think there is some behind the scenes diplomacy or cajoling by the U.S. to India on this front?
That's where to look, Ben. Remember that India, while being a major democracy on the world stage, it is a neutral power that has a history of buying Russian weapons, and it has its own influence and its own relationship with Moscow that's completely independent from U.S. relations with Russia. So I think the same can be said for China, which has a growing security partnership with Russia. You know, we talk about the crinks China, Russia, Iran, North Korea alignment on this podcast on a regular basis. So it is very interesting to question the extent to which those two powers may have some kind of a behind the scenes role in Trump's overall strategic approach to trying to end the Ukraine war right now. And I think the issue of tariffs and using them as a leveraging tool to possibly cajole very difficult diplomatic alignment between India and China vis-a-vis the Ukraine war, and just try to pressure Russian President Vladimir Putin to sit down with Donald Trump and maybe even have Volodymyr Zelensky in the room. It's very interesting to see that play out. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Daniel Karbler. He's a non-resident senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's also the former commander of U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. But I'm talking with him here on August 6th at the 2025 Space and Missile Defense Symposium in Huntsville, Alabama. How's your week going here?
It has been tremendous. It's always a good opportunity to catch up with old friends, see our air missile defenders and the great work that they are doing, seeing what industry is doing, and really just being able to take some pride in what the air missile defense and space community are contributing to the Department of Defense and the security of our homeland.
It is amazing in Huntsville. I don't know how many Americans that aren't directly involved in space and missile defense understand the importance of this city and really the state of Alabama to this. How important is Huntsville, and why is all of this here when it comes to rocket science and missile defense systems?
Yeah, so a huge history just of rocket and missile development. You can take it all the way back to the Army being the first service to launch a satellite into orbit up to where we are today. And it is just the epicenter of technological expertise, whether it's NASA, whether it's the Department of Defense. Redstone Arsenal hosts the FBI and other federal agencies. You have the operational side of air missile defense and space with Space and Missile Defense Command here. You have the acquisition side with the Missile Defense Agency, PEO Missiles in Space, the RCTO, Rapid Critical Capabilities Technology Office. There's a lot here. And then, and it wouldn't be possible if you didn't have the great relationship with the city of Huntsville and the city of Madison and how supportive they are to all the efforts that we undertake here within the military.
So this week at this symposium, really the back hallway discussion is all about Golden Dome. Trump has, signed this executive order calling for a new missile defense shield for the entire United States. What do you see as the major challenge going forward in terms of actually getting Golden Dome satellite-based missile defense system made?
A couple of challenges. The first is we've got to be able to talk about it. We've got to be able to share with the American public what we are intending to do with Golden Dome for America. We've got to share with industry what the architecture is going to look like. We've got to share with the services what is going to be called upon for their forces' contribution to Golden Dome for America. We got to talk to individual state governors because they may house some of the Golden Dome for America capabilities. Could be permanently, could be on a more episodic basis. So we've got to do a good job of just communicate. We got to talk to Congress about it. So the biggest task right away is to talk about this, garner support, and then the second piece will be General Gutlein and the operational side will have to deliver capabilities within the timeline that President Trump laid out when he unveiled Golden Dome for America, and he said within 2.5, 3 years, we will have operational capability.
So I don't know if it's official or not, but there is somewhat of an order from the Secretary of Defense for people not to talk about Golden Dome. That seems like it's changing now. Do you feel like that there's going to be more open discussion about it after this week?
So we know that on Thursday there'll be an industry day, Golden Dome for America industry day that Missile Defense Agency is hosting. So we'll openly talk about Golden Dome here within the Space and Missile Defense Symposium. We really have just focused on defending here at home and defending our soldiers abroad. Yeah, there's a little bit of talk about, hey, you can't mention Golden Dome. I jokingly told my counterparts, well, let's call it gilded helmet as our code word. And so anyways, in all seriousness, we are going to get to, industry is going to get to hear from the different stakeholders within Golden Dome for America on Thursday at the MDA-sponsored Industry Day.
So the stakeholders within the U.S. military, but then also these big players and potentially smaller, newer defense contractors. President Trump has, as you mentioned, tapped General Michael Gutlein as the Golden Dome czar. We actually broke that before it happened at Threat Status. Interestingly, General Gutlein has got acquisition authority, which is important. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what that means. And are you confident that he's got a team around him at this point to navigate the complicated private defense industry space and pick the right companies to deliver what's needed?
Yeah, so he's assembling his team right now. I know some of the folks that he's bringing on board, and it is the folks that have been working the air and missile defense mission set for decades. I mean, this is not just a pickup team where he's going around the Pentagon or services and grabbing people kind of willy-nilly. He is truly reaching out and grabbing the air, missile defense, and space experts who are going to help him solve the Golden Dome for America mission set. His acquisition authority's pretty broad, which he's going to need. He's the milestone decision authority. He will have a lot of pull. The fact that his chain of command is President, SecDef, DepSecDef, and then General Gutlein is significant because he will not have to suffer through a lot of the bureaucratic hurdles within the Pentagon that other program managers have to face.
Which agency do you see as ultimately ending up as the operator of this futuristic missile defense shield if it gets built?
So the NORTHCOM commander has the responsibility for defending the homeland. Now he has his job jar is pretty full. So I believe that he is going to have to delegate basically the day-to-day Golden Dome for America operational activities down to a subordinate commander. I have advocated that it should be the commander for Joint Functional Component Command for Integrated Missile Defense, JFIC-IMD, which is the dual hat that the Space and Missile Defense Commander wears, and today that's Lieutenant General Sean Gainey. I believe that General Gainey's organization, the JFIC-IMD organization, really should be the ones that become the operational arm for the NORTHCOM commander to run Golden Dome for America. And this is not a reach. SMDC has already got the responsibility to be the Army Service Component Commander for Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense, GMD, for the NORTHCOM commander. This was just be an expansion of his role into not just ground-based mid-course defense, read that as our missile defense against intercontinental ballistic missiles, but now he's going to have all air and missile defense responsibilities in defense of the homeland.
There's a lot of talk about integrating different technical aspects, futuristic satellites with HBTSS sensors that could track hypersonic missiles, ground-based or satellite-based counter-strike capabilities, futuristic stuff. Some of it's deployable now, some of it's made, some of it's being developed. Are you confident that this integration problem can be solved and that there actually are big or small companies in the American defense industrial space that have this stuff made? Or do we actually have a really big hump to get over on the technical front here?
I'm confident that if we stay true to the epics that the Missile Defense Agency laid out a couple of months ago and the timelines associated with those epics, we will meet each one of those gates. So I believe Epic 1 was up through December of 2026. Epic 2 was December of 2028. Epic 3 was December of 2030. And then Epic 4 was beyond. The different capability packages that we can deliver with those epics absolutely are attainable. And if you look at December of 2028 as kind of the end state for what President Trump was looking for in terms of having an operational capability, we can meet that. It's really not the technological challenges. It's a little bit more of some of the bureaucratic infighting that could take place in terms of just providing capabilities. I mean, I don't want to make light of the fact that there's going to be technological challenges, but it's not anything that we really don't already accomplish, especially in some of our overseas locations where we have air and missile defense capabilities across the services integrated with other countries providing protection. So we can do it. We have the will. We have the funding. We do have to get the public discourse going more so that we can garner that support, again, out of the American public, out of Congress, and out of the different services and agencies to make this a whole government approach in terms of garnering support and approval.
Let me ask you more broadly about the extent to which Golden Dome is really about deterrence. Is it in your mind more just about deterrence as an idea, or is it actually about creating this operational shield that has these futuristic capabilities, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. And so if you're kind of a classic deterrent, if you believe in classic deterrence, which consists of three parts. First, you have to be able to impose unacceptable costs on the adversary. So read that as our strategic deterrent, our nuclear operations. And then you've got to be able to deny the adversary benefit of his attack onto you. And that's what missile defense is there to do. And then the third part is you have to have credible messaging about these capabilities. And so when you bring those three together, that is truly classic deterrence. And so missile defense plays a equally important part as our strategic deterrence, our nuclear operations arm, in terms of signaling the adversary, you really don't want to take that shot. It's not going to be successful. And oh, by the way, you're not really going to like the counterpunch that's going to come at you now.
Are you wary that certain great power adversaries, I'm specifically talking about China, are you wary that China may be watching all of what these U.S. companies are doing vis-a-vis this Golden Dome discussion and really trying to steal the technology and secretly work on their own counter push to Golden Dome before the United States is even able to finish it?
Yeah, there's always concern that our adversaries are trying to rip off our technology, steal our secrets. So that's one of the good sides of the fact that we haven't done a lot of broadcasting on Golden Dome for America and the architecture, et cetera. Yeah, because we definitely have to worry about the adversaries. So we got to protect cyber. The industrial base has got to take full measure of protecting whatever technological improvements or enhancements that they're making, whatever they're developing. That's critical because as soon as the adversary finds out the capabilities we're deploying, of course they're going to figure out what the weaknesses are and the vulnerabilities in those capabilities, and they're going to try to operate around them.
Speaking about messaging and narrative about this, I actually recently learned, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're actually in a movie, a Hollywood movie that's going to be coming out, I think, later this year. I believe it's called A House of Dynamite, that has to do with missile defense. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what that experience is? That true?
So it is true. I was very fortunate to get hired on as a technical advisor by Catherine Bigelow, won the Academy Award for Hurt Locker, and work as her technical advisor in the movie. It is about a unattributed missile attack into the United States. That's all I can share with you as far as the plot, and that's available on the Netflix website if you want to look it up, and a host of incredible actors, and how prescient, how timely of this movie, given where we're at right now with what the threats are doing and with what the administration wants to do with respect to Golden Dome for America. But yeah, that movie will come out here in October, and I'm really looking forward to being able to have America watch it. And what's really important is that this movie, what we hope to get out of this movie is to start fostering more discussion about strategic deterrence. Back to how it was in the 1960s when America talked a lot about strategic deterrence and the importance of it, and it kind of fell off the radar. And when I was the Stratcom Chief of Staff working for General John Hyten and then later for Admiral Chaz Richard, it was always about getting the discourse about strategic deterrence and getting the American public to talk about it. And now a movie will come out that will help further that discussion and get America talking about it in a serious manner.
And do you play yourself in the movie, or who do you play in the movie?
You got to watch the movie to find out. Catherine did. She did cast me in the movie, and it was an awesome experience.
Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Daniel Karbler, thank you so much for coming on the Threat Status Podcast.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here on the show where Guy and I each identify a threat, whether it's here at home domestically or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now this week. And my threat of the week is a Chinese military attack in space. Friend of the show, Tory Bruno, the president and CEO of United Launch Alliance, sketched this out in a very thorough and somewhat frightening piece this week for the Washington Times, in which he explained how, for example, a Chinese military attack on Taiwan could unfold, and it wouldn't be with Chinese ships and warplanes taking off for Taiwan as the first step. Before that, he said China would try to take out our constellation of military satellites that enable GPS-guided weapons and coordinated operations across thousands of miles. And China has specifically been building military capabilities to do just that. Tory Bruno talks specifically about these so-called satellite inspectors that China has in orbit, which could actually be a method of disabling U.S. satellites. It also has developed anti-satellite missiles, ground-based lasers. We can go on. We don't have time to go through all those details here today, but Tory lays out 5 specific actions he says the U.S. should take to harden its defenses in space and guard against those kinds of Chinese attacks. And I'd urge listeners to go read that in detail on the Washington Times website. But for now, it's a threat because while we talk about a lot of the difficulties in moving military equipment and personnel across the Pacific and, building hellscapes and drone swarms to protect Taiwan, we need to keep in mind that a lot of that stuff just can't be done if we lose our satellite capabilities because of a Chinese attack.
It's totally interesting, Ben. Tory Bruno is an interesting guy, and he's been writing really smart stuff for Threat Status, and we certainly appreciate that. I will tell you that at the Aspen Security Forum last month, I saw Robert Lightfoot, who's pretty much the head of all space operations for Lockheed Martin, talking about how China and Russia have weaponized space with threats to American satellites. That story is still findable on the Threat Status pages. My threat of the week, Ben, it jumps on a story that Threat Status correspondent Vaughn Cocaine wrote for us this week off a report that we got our hands on from the private intelligence company Strider. That report warns that state-affiliated groups tied to Russia, China, and North Korea have been penetrating open source software, or OSS, to insert malicious code into it. This may sound like it doesn't matter and it's really obscure, Ben, but consider that there are studies out there showing that more than 90% of modern computer applications contain open source code, and a large portion of commercial code bases also incorporate open source code. So my threat of the week is that U.S. adversaries have found a new way to live off the land, so to speak, in that cyber world and penetrate the wide open space of open source code in ways that can have dramatic intelligence gathering benefits for those adversaries in the future.
Yeah, speaking of frightening reports, that was an eye-opener from Vaughn this week, and very frightening to think about. We've set up these systems that just could inherently be vulnerable, and we may not even know the level of the threat that we've allowed to creep in there already over the past 5-10 years or longer. So definitely a good read. Thank you for that, and thank you for all the good work you're doing down there in Huntsville. Huge thanks to retired General Karbler for coming on the Threat Status podcast, and a big thanks to all of you, of course, our listeners. Please go ahead, hit that subscribe button, share with all of your friends, and Guy and I will be back next week on the Threat Status podcast.